Now to our top story. More testimony, more problems. That seems to be the mantra for the Trump administration, which has been fighting furiously and at times quite hastily all this week to block their own staff from talking to Congress or doing what you'd expect Trump officials to try to do, which is defend Trump. Now, apparently the White House strategy is that silence and stonewalling would ultimately be a better look than letting their own appointees say what Trump did in this Ukraine plot, because Trump has lost at that whole strategy today, which led to this scene. Diplomat Marie Yovanovitch marching into Congress to cooperate with this impeachment probe. The former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine is one of the people who knows most about this Ukraine scandal at the heart of the impeachment probe. And while the Trump administration had ordered her not to go do what you see on your screen, not to walk into Congress, Democrats hit back with this subpoena, and she sided with her lawful obligation to honor it. Yovanovitch spent hours talking to lawmakers behind closed doors. We can't say everything that went down, but we do know that the entire spectacle, the entire fact-finding discussion is something Donald Trump wanted to prevent. And that strategy is failing not only on this score today, but apparently more broadly, with Democrats prepping for Monday testimony from Trump's former top aide on Russia, Fiona Hill, which has stoked fear among people close to the president because Trump aides believe, quote, she can't be controlled or pressured not to reveal potentially damaging information about Trump. Or take another name that's gotten famous in a hurry in this scandal, EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland, the guy who was personally talking to Trump after the smoking gun texts that he was sending went out on Ukraine. They're now public. Apparently he wants to talk too, agreeing now to testify as soon as next week, despite the Trump administration efforts to silence him, just like they tried to silence the ambassador who also spoke today. So while those insiders talk, Trump's handpicked head of the State Department keeps dodging.
Text messages show that diplomats under your authority told the Ukrainians that a good relationship with President Trump was only possible if they investigated his political opponent and theories about what happened in 2016. Were you aware that this was happening?
You know, again, you've got your facts wrong. Sounds like you're working, at least in part, for the Democratic National Committee.
Not an answer. But what does it mean when you take it all together? And what does it mean when you think about everything that's gone down just this week? We're starting to see a contrast between Donald Trump declaring a position, the White House counsel penning a dramatic letter to Congress claiming they wouldn't cooperate with any of this impeachment probe or talk to Congress. And that's contrasted with some of the most critical people involved in Trump's Ukraine plot talking, cooperating. Trump's former Ukraine ambassador, the Trump EU diplomat who texted about the Biden plot, and of course, multiple whistleblowers. For a president who so often resorts to crude, mob-like language and complains about rats and snitching, perhaps he's now learning a lesson outlined by Dwayne Carter in the song Snitch. Ain't no telling who's spilling the Earl. You telling your boy, he telling his girl. Oh, now she telling the world. Well, Trump's own people are telling. And while he may call them snitches like a gangster, under federal law, they're called something else. They're deemed whistleblowers. They're protected if they state facts about crime or abuse. And tonight we can report something else. More new potential whistleblowers coming forward and contacting Congress to speak out. Let's get right into it with a great panel. Former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, former federal prosecutor Maya Wiley, and former Ambassador Michael McFaul will join us shortly. Your views on, Joyce, what it means to have people speaking out?
You know, this is like dominoes beginning to fall, and everyone who's ever prosecuted a case and built a significant case knows this. Once one person comes forward and tells the truth, Ari, it's that much more difficult for other people to continue to lie, because they start to appreciate that they're putting themselves at risk. And I think we're seeing that here now that the ambassador has spoken apparently candidly and honestly. It puts pressure on everyone else.
And elaborate on that, because if nobody's talking and you can blame government or the lawyers, even if you are an honest civil servant, you say, well, I don't need to go first. I'm waiting. We'll see what I get ordered around to do. But this is a situation now where people are getting in. So Mr. Sondland, who was held back, looks around and goes, I don't know that I want to be the last one in.
You know, I'm not sure. He might be in a different category. I think that there were prudential reasons that White House counsel didn't want to let him testify if they let him testify, they would have to let everyone else testify.
By prudential, you're using a lawyer's word for not legally required?
Well, I think they viewed it as something that wouldn't make sense, that wouldn't be in their best interest. So it wouldn't be prudent for them to let him testify and then refuse to give permission to other people. I think that they expect his testimony will be favorable to Trump. He is, of course, the man of the carefully crafted cover your, text message.
But this goes back to, if he is on Trump's side, first you and then Maya, why fight so hard to have him hold back from speaking? I mean, he's the guy who's defending Trump.
And only because they don't want anyone else to testify. They don't want Fiona Hill to testify. I'm sure that they didn't want to see the ambassador testify today. These are not witnesses that are favorable to the White House.
Maya, there is some spilling of the Earl.
There's some Earl all up under here. But I think it's really when we look at what the former ambassador said today, right? Which is, I was told that back in 2018 there were calls to get rid of me. And then we know from the indictments yesterday against the Giuliani clients, right, Parnas and Fruman, that they were doling out campaign money. And in the same month, May 2018, they were asking for Yovanovitch to be pushed out, that we have a congressman, Pete Sessions, writing a letter saying she should resign, she should go.
So let me bring in let me bring the evidence for you, because there's a lot you're stacking up, and this is what we're learning for the first time today, according to Yovanovitch's testimony. So let me read to it. She says, look, she was ousted even though there had been a statement from inside the administration she'd done nothing wrong. Here we go. The department had been under pressure from Trump to remove me, she says today. She doesn't know Giuliani's motives for attacking her, so she's being very fair and careful that she can't say what's in his mind. But she adds, quote, contacts of Giuliani may have believed their financial ambitions were stymied by our anti-corruption policy in Ukraine. Maya, translate.
There's a whole lot of Earl. Okay, that's it. Right, the translation here is follow the money. So you have money that is going from businessmen who are in Florida, but connected to Ukraine, making money in Ukraine, working with Giuliani, making money with Giuliani in various ways that we don't fully understand, funneling that to U.S. electeds at the same time that there's pressure coming to her to get rid of her. But remember, most of her testimony today, big chunk of it was focused on her efforts to support anti-corruption in the Ukraine, because it's the corruption that was a national security problem for the United States. And these are people who benefited from it.
And just to pin that, because corruption has also become a very Orwellian word in the last few weeks. Some of the people who are most alleged to have been corrupt are accusing everyone else of being corrupt. So just to drill down further, before you even get to a plot to go after Biden, what this diplomat is testifying to today is that she thinks there was also a separate potential abuse of power about ousting U.S. officials to make people money.
Exactly.
And that is not okay?
That is not okay. And I just want to say that I thought one of the things that was so powerful about her testimony and so important was she said, I am the child of people who fled communism and Nazism. She said, I know what totalitarianism looks like.
Wow.
And then she went into her testimony. So that was a very clear message to the American public, I think, and to Congress about what the stakes are, as she reminded us that she has served Democrats and Republicans throughout her career.
Yeah, both of you stay with me. Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia Michael McFaul, who knows all about the diplomacy here, is also joining us as promised. I want to play something from the rally last night. We led with a lot of the facts and the credible testimony we've been getting, but there was this big Trump rally, and this is the way they're trying to reboot 2016 for this new scandal. Take a look.
How do you think Joe Biden and his how do you think his son's feeling right now? Maybe lock her up goes to lock him up. I don't know. It might lock him up. I don't know. I like lock her up a little bit more, but thank you. That's a good idea. I like that idea.
That's how it's playing out there. Ambassador McFaul, your view of all of this, and for those of us who are not steeped in what diplomats normally do and don't do, what did you see as significant in this testimony today?
First, that tape you just played is chilling. I remember it from the Republican National Committee when they were up there yelling, "Lock her up." I would just point out Mr. Biden's taxes are all been for public record. You know how much money he has. It'd be great if the president would do the same to see what's going on. But to the point that you asked, first of all, just full disclosure, I have known Ambassador Yovanovitch for 30 years, probably, at least 25 years. She has served as ambassador in 3 different postings. As you already pointed out, served Republicans and Democrats. One of the most competent ambassadors I have ever worked with, speaks fluent Russian, has her first degree from Princeton, is just a patriot and a civil servant out to defend her oath of office. And I encourage everybody to go and read this testimony if you want to know what a real patriot is like. That's the first thing. It was moving to me, Ari. I have to tell you honestly, it was so moving to me. This is not somebody that wants to be in the spotlight. This is somebody that was just doing their job and is thrust into this because, number 2, the most important thing she says is there are standard operating procedures for the United States government to advance America's national interests. And when it comes to diplomacy, it is the State Department that is charged with advancing our diplomatic activities. And what she reports in this written testimony, and let's be clear, we haven't heard what she's actually said, before the committee and the people there yet. But just in her written testimony, she said what happened here was it was privatized. Mr. Giuliani came in. He started working with the prosecutor general, Mr. Lutsenko, by the way, who had a very adversarial relationship with the ambassador. And what they did was they were using, the name of advancing America's interests. They were looking to advance the private, personal interests of President Trump.
To your point, privatized is a big way to put it. A more simple way to put it would be they were trying to turn U.S. policy and make it for sale. And so what emerges here is a second front in the potential abuse of power, at least according to this new witness. One front was abusing foreign policy to go after domestic rivals. The second front appears to be abusing foreign policy to make friends of the president money. Have you ever seen anything like that when you were at State?
No. Nor when I was at the State Department, nor at the White House. So I've written about foreign policy for 30 years. There are occasionally these cowboys that come along and think that they're going to fix the policy on their own. Remember, in the Reagan administration, we had Iran-Contra and Ollie North. But even in that case, he thought he was advancing America's national interests. What we're talking here is about private interests, both of the president, but also these 2 individuals. As you say, there's a lot more to be learned about how they were trying to leverage their relationship with Mayor Giuliani for their own private economic gain.
Yeah, well, you lay it out. I hope people are listening closely to what you just said. I want to bring one more point to Joyce Vance, and that is we are here on a day when the President of the United States is now claiming that maybe his lawyer isn't his lawyer. And the echoes are eerie, and whether you love Rudy Giuliani or you dislike Rudy Giuliani or your judgment is out, I don't think most people in America have not formed an opinion on Mr. Giuliani. As a human being, your heart might go out to him a little bit if you think about the fact that Michael Cohen was not the person who was most responsible for everything that he was up to, because he was an agent acting often on others' behalves. But he's in prison right now. And he's in prison, the feds say, partly because of what he did, but he's also in prison partly because, allegedly, according to the same indictment, what the president did. And I want to play for you the echo here for your full analysis of Trump on Cohen and Trump on Rudy. Take a look.
I don't know them. I don't know about them. I don't know what they do. But I don't know. Maybe they were clients of Rudy. You'd have to ask Rudy. I just don't know. But you have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's my attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael.
Is it a bad sign when President Trump starts saying you have to ask the attorney, and maybe that's not his attorney anymore, for that attorney?
Trump always has tells, right? We know that when he says, a man came up to me and said, sir, that we're about to hear something that's not true. Here we see the classic Trump throwing someone close to him under the bus. But Ari, you have a much bigger heart than I have. Rudy Giuliani walked into this with eyes open, apparently decided to hitch his wagon to a man who dishonored the rule of law, something that U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Rudy Giuliani, devoted good years in his life to. I hope now that he'll take advantage, if it's true that he's under investigation, of the opportunity maybe to achieve some sort of a renewed good faith with the American people by coming forward and telling the truth.
And tonight, him adding to what we just showed by saying maybe Giuliani's not his lawyer anymore. He doesn't know. Wow. Joyce Vance, Maya Wiley, Ambassador McFaul, a big kickoff to our Friday night coverage. Thank you so much. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.